everyone. Today I will be reviewing a documentary that has been released recently called Global Warming: An Inconvenient Lie. Regardless of what your stance is now on global warming and climate change, I invite you to practice some intellectual integrity by closely looking at the data and arguments provided by both sides of the debate. I believe there are two purposes for this documentary. One, reveal and discuss the scientific data debunking the global warming and climate change theories. Two, reveal the underlying motives behind the global warming and climate change movement. First, let's talk about CO2. Multiple scientists in this documentary discuss the role and effect CO2 has on our climate and our environment. The truth is, CO2 is the gas of life. However, climate alarmists will tell you that it is a pollutant. CO2 is a requirement for photosynthesis. In the absence of CO2, plants will go through what is called photorespiration. During photorespiration, plants will produce hydrogen peroxide instead of the sugar the plant needs. Hydrogen peroxide damages the plants. In essence, the higher concentration of CO2, the greener the environment. CO2 was a pollutant. The ideal emission for CO2 would be zero, correct? What would happen if the emission of CO2 was dropped to zero? Life on this planet would cease to exist, with the exception of maybe a few microorganisms. In isolation, yes, CO2 does have a warming effect. However, CO2's effect on the climate is more complex due to the various interactions it has with various other elements. For example, CO2's warming effect can create more water vapor. Water vapor creates clouds. Clouds reflect back the sunlight and provide shade. Therefore, the clouds help cool the climate. If you want to study the effects of greenhouse gases on the environment, it would make more sense to study water vapor as opposed to CO2. CO2 is not the only element that affects water vapor. Climate alarmists will tell you humans are solely responsible for high CO2 levels, and these levels have been on the rise since the Industrial Revolution. However, according to their own data, CO2 levels were at a record high way before the Industrial Revolution. A section of their data is often omitted from their presentations. Climate alarmists fail to mention how much the sun and sunspots affect our climate. The more sunspots, the higher the temperature here on Earth. After about 400 years of recording sunspots, the lowest recorded CO2 levels were during the Little Ice Age. Climate alarmists tend to focus on about 5 variables as opposed to the thousands of variables that affect our climate. To understand the climate, you need to have an in-depth understanding of multiple systems, such as, but not limited to, oceanology, meteorology, glaciology, archaeology, ecology, astronomy, solar physics, and history. Most scientists only specify in one of these areas. There are multiple issues with the mathematical equation itself that predicts the average global temperature. In this documentary, Lord Monckton in detail reveals 4 major errors he has found with this mathematical equation. One of the most fundamental errors of this equation is that the output is an average of multiple averages. All of the data that is being averaged is measured in various units and measured through various methods. Mathematically, it doesn't even make sense to average a bunch of averages, especially when those numbers don't even relate to each other. In the documentary, astrophysicist Willie Soon gives a great example. He puts up multiple images of various jets. These are jets of all different kinds and of all different sizes. He then says he wants a jet that is an average of all the jets displayed on the screen. He feeds all these images into a computer program, and the output is a blurry blob. Another issue with the equation is that it doesn't matter what numbers you plug into the equation, the resulting graph will end up being a hockey stick shape. Another important thing to recognize is that computer models are not representations of reality. In order for a computer model to be a representation of reality, it has to be tested with real-world measurements. All 73 computer models have failed to predict global temperatures, and in fact have failed so miserably that they predicted way higher than what has been observed now. Despite what some scientists may tell you, there is not a 97% consensus in the scientific community regarding global warming and climate change. Consensus has no place in science. Consensus is a political issue. That being said, let's get into motives and politics. Many of these politicians and scientists are not oblivious to the issues with the theory, data collection, and mathematical formula for global warming and human-made climate change. So why do they continue to push this agenda onto the population? And how are they able to do it? One of the biggest goals of this documentary is to raise awareness of Agenda 21. The goal of Agenda 21 is to eliminate the Constitution, national sovereignty, and unalienable individual rights and replace them with a world government controlled by financial elites. Multiple researchers and journalists in this documentary discuss the methods used to try to achieve Agenda 21's goals. The biggest tool? Education. More accurately described as indoctrination programs in our schools. Children will be voters one day, and college students are of voting age. Marxist ideals are being heavily pushed into academia to influence the votes of college students so that they will vote their rights away. And earlier on in our educational system, in the elementary schools and middle schools, through the Green Agenda programs, kids are taught that private property is a threat to the environment. If children are taught earlier on to despise private property, they are less likely to reject communism in the future. If we really want to educate our children, we should teach them to juxtapose central planning efforts and privatized, localized efforts in keeping the environment clean and healthy. We should teach them to come to their own conclusions as free-thinking, educated individuals. Instead, our government tries to impose an educational program that tells students that more government power equals a healthier environment. Collectivist politicians will often use the presence of an endangered species to justify confiscating private property, especially farming property. They have been doing this even in the absence of evidence that there has been any harm inflicted on these animals, directly or indirectly, by the farmers. Yet, when large windmills are erected and are the direct cause of deaths to birds in the environment, they are not taken down. If government and financial elites want to be in control of the population, they need to be in control of the food and what is being put into the food. This is why localized, privatized farmers are often at war with centralized governments. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Scientists, unfortunately, are not above corruption and have a history of serving the powers that be. I encourage everyone to do their own research on both sides of the debate. If it was a government, tax-funded study, keep this in mind. Governments not only want results that justify its existence, but they want results that justify giving it more power and money. In order for governments to justify individuals giving them more money and power, they have to scare the population into thinking that global warming and climate change is solely a result of human activity. Acknowledging that the sun plays the biggest role in the fluctuations of our climate does not benefit government. Why? Because the government cannot regulate the sun. They have to convince you that you are a pollutant with every exhale that you release. Instead of attacking the plethora of toxic chemicals that we put into our food and release into the environment, what do they decide to attack? The gas of life. If you found any value in this video, please like, share, and subscribe. I also have a Facebook page and an Instagram. You can follow me there as well. I will post a link down below where you can access this documentary and look up the information for yourself. Thanks for watching, everyone. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.